Welcome to Living Legacy Leadership, where you'll be introduced to insights, tools, and strategies to leverage creative living and giving. I'm your host, Donna Kim Brand, creative brain trainer and legacy strategy coach. I help changemakers and late career professionals who are deciding what's next to find out what will thrill you and fulfill you, adding meaningful value in your next stage of life. The guests and show content I bring to you each week all address some unique aspect of learning, leadership, or legacy. This helps you raise your own game as a leader in business and life, and also showcases some extraordinary people who exemplify living legacy leadership. At least once a month, I also offer a training session to skill you in game changer thinking for your own application. So get your notebook ready or sharpen your memory by tuning in your attention, and we'll dive right in. Now, I'll let you know that I am overseas at the moment, across the pond in merry old England, and we have the great pleasure of introducing Roy Brand to you today. Now, Roy is a wealth management consultant at CFS Wealth Management. He's a senior partner practice at St. James Place Wealth Management. His emphasis is on maintaining a long-term relationship with his clients and to provide them with a source of trusted advice as their financial needs evolve over the years. He has several areas of specialty, but tonight we're going to focus on pre-retirement planning and at-retirement planning. So welcome, Roy Brand.
Thank you. Nice to speak to you.
Thank you. So give us a little sense how your day has been today, Roy.
It's been quite a long day today. Early start into central London to meet with some clients. Then back to the office to speak to some more clients and do a bit of business practice. So it's been a long day, but always nice to talk to you.
Well, thank you. Yes, it's later in the evening here in the UK. Now, Roy, I know very well that you came from a large family with 6 boys. You're the youngest. And between you and the oldest, there's about 17 years between you. And I know that at least the older set, the first 3 at least, grew up using even rations after World War II, ration coupons, which we can hardly even fathom in our modern day. So did any of this sort of upbringing that you either experienced or heard about play a part in your career choice?
I think so. I mean, it's certainly being part of a big family. There's always, I often joke that having 5 older brothers, I'm never short of advice to ignore. So there was always a hand on the shoulder with people giving me guidance, which maybe subconsciously that led to me wanting to give guidance to other people, because being at the bottom of the rung, there was no one to pass on all that knowledge to. But certainly also, coming from quite difficult was the wrong thing. We were definitely happy, but certainly wasn't a great deal of money around, and it certainly made me want to kind of improve my financial situation and find a way of doing that. So I'm pretty sure that played some part in it.
I know your older siblings mostly went into service-oriented works, policing, fire service, airlines, and so on. And you've actually taken the route of a profession. Yeah,
well, the 3 younger brothers have all gone into a profession rather than service-orientated. I don't think it was a deliberate thing. I think the opportunities were different given that passage of time. That 17 years made a huge difference in society in this country, and there were greater opportunities to do things. So I think that's probably why we ended up in professions as opposed to public service.
Although obviously what you do is a great service. So who do you actually represent in financial advising? Do you have an ideal client or target group or demographic you work with particularly, Roy?
No, I've been in the industry 23 years, and along the way you pick up lots of different types of clients. My area of expertise, as you've already pointed out, is retirement planning, so it tended to be and also corporate, so dealing with small businesses as well. So it started off in that way, but of course it's gone off in all sorts of directions, because I'm happy to deal with most clients. it's there's one of the great things about my occupation is that I get to choose who I work with and stay with them for long periods of time. It's nice to see how their lives change as well as mine.
Well, it's true. It's true. And full disclosure here, Roy does happen to be my wonderful brother-in-law, and and I know you, Roy. In the family, you are very often the one that everyone else turns to for advice. So I think your early intuitions about looping back on either ignoring or giving advice actually has worked out, and you find yourself in that position.
Well, it's nice to hear that. It's now I'm kind of more mature than I was before, so people are actually taking my advice, which is nice. I was always happy to give it, but it wasn't often taken before.
Well, that's probably the case for most of us. So, you talked about how things have changed in terms of just the context of passage of time over history. And one of the things that in your industry of financial planning and investment and so on, that makes a big difference is the extension of lifespans. As I understand, at the turn of the century, people expected to die 20 or 30 years earlier than we do now, and yet we still operate pretty much under the original or just a slightly modified retirement system. So could you explain the retirement system in the UK, and tell us what the life expectancy is here?
Yeah, well, there are two parts to it, really. There are, well, three possibly. There is the provision by the state, so there is a state pension. There's a small additional tax called national insurance that we all pay towards the state pension. That was originally introduced in its current form in around about 1946, just after the Second World War. And at that point, the retirement age for men was set at 65 because the average life expectancy for men at that point was 65. Oh. We now find ourselves in a position that the average life expectancy certainly for me, full disclosure, I'm 50, that my life expectancy is 86 now, and I've got a 1 in 4 chance of 1 in 4 chance of surviving until 92. So the state provision was never designed to cover this huge increase in life expectancy, and over the years it has gradually increased. Although the amount of the pension, which is around about £160 a week, that hasn't changed in real terms a great deal. It goes up in line with inflation. But the retirement age now is moved for me from 65 to 67, and if you were born after 1970, then you won't get your state pension until you're 68 now. So that's the base level retirement planning. And then just recently, employers have always offered some kind of retirement planning, but as recently as 2013, there was a big shake-up of employer provision, which means that all...
Let's see.
Hello.
Oh, there you are. You're back. Okay, so we'll just continue, and then Joe can edit it out. So you were saying that from 2013.
2013, okay. So 2013, employers were encouraged, let's say forced, to put in place some pension provision for all employees earning over a certain level. So when you join a new employer now, you are auto-enrolled into a pension, and the employer has to make contributions to it as well. And then in addition to that, there is kind of a very healthy market in personal provision. So if you want to save further for your retirement, then you are able to make contributions and get tax relief on those contributions to the personal plan. So what we're seeing now is that the picture of where people's income will come from in retirement is from several different sources, and very often people are deciding to use their own intellect to fund their income in retirement as well, by just maybe doing some consultancy work or something like that.
Well, yeah, I think the gig economy is quite healthy here, like in the U.S. with independent contractors and so on. Does the UK have a history of saving, or where else might they bring in this extra stream of income?
Yeah, we've had tax efficient savings for some time. The government has encouraged saving into investments to encourage the stock market. Most of it started around, it developed from the 1980s when Margaret Thatcher was in charge and wanted to boost the economy by having all the money that was being saved in banks put into stock markets to encourage growth. And then it's developed from there. So we do have quite a long history of being savers. Of course, we are, as a nation, more affluent than we've ever been. So shortly after the Second World War, there wasn't a huge amount of savings around. But now, something like 80% of the population have some exposure to the stock market in some way or another.
That's interesting. Yeah, and is that on par with Europe? And
it's more than Europe. They are increasing. It depends. Europe is a big place, but certainly
sure.
the developed economies in Europe, France, Germany, at the same period, they would have been more investing in property and cash. But they are gradually increasing their exposure to stock markets, having seen the growth over the last 20 or 30 years. But they're up to something like 65 to 70% now in the developed parts of Europe, in the industrial parts of Europe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I know even though at the time when I lived in England, there were riots out in the street when the government decided to increase tuition at universities to, from minimal amounts to maybe a couple of £1,000 per term, which is laughable when we consider what we have to pay in the States for even state education. But we have a big discussion in the States where people whose children are actually ready to go on to university, should the parents pay the tuition versus pay into their retirement fund and so on. Do you have that kind of discussion over here, or is that a moot point because it's a lesser amount?
Well, not really. Interesting. I had this conversation this morning with the client whose two children have already been through university, and one is going to Oxford this year, and he can afford to pay their tuition, but he's minded to let them take on some debt to give them some responsibility. I mean, the likelihood is that he'll be in a position that he will pay off their debts at the end of the course, but there are certainly more people now taking that consideration on board when they decide whether to go to university or not, because it is, and the tuition fees alone are £9,000 a year. I'm not sure how that equates to the US. I know it's a lot more expensive, but and there is no help. Traditionally, it has been free to go to university here, so it's still a big leap. And then there's living costs as well. So it's a difficult decision now whether you do fund it or whether the government will loan you the money to pay for the tuition fees. And you only have to pay that back once you start earning over a certain level. But the interest rates are quite high, somewhere in the region of 6.5%. So it's certainly something that people, as you know, I have two children who are 9 and 11, and we're considering, we are putting money aside now to help them. Whether at the point that they go to university we give them the money then to live off of, or whether they use the debt and then repay it afterwards, we'll take into consideration at the time.
A little bit of psychological and parental leverage there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's you can't give children everything because it doesn't really make them very nice people. So regardless of how much money they have to understand that when they start work, they will be starting and probably on the bottom rung of a ladder. So it's important for them to understand that not things don't come for free. It doesn't really matter whether you can afford to do it or not. But of course, there are some people who don't. That isn't a consideration. If you are wealthy, then you would just pay